thing I ever thought I would see is Vince McMahon opening Nitro. I just was in total, like, it was just totally surreal. And, and I was watching, the reason I taped it was because Eric Bischoff came on, like, the night, the week before, and was like, this is going to be a big Nitro. It might be the last Nitro on Turner Television. Something really big is going to happen. And so I was like, oh, well, whatever this is, I got to tape it. This is pretty much like a landmark Nitro. And it was the last Nitro. And I was just totally dumbfounded when Vince opened it. And it was really just unfortunate. Diego, how the hell are you doing? But it is fortunate that we have a nice PC now. We have a nice capture device, and Bischoff named it Night of Champions. Yes, he did. Bischoff is a very complicated guy, He's very hot and cold with everything, like by every account. He's just totally bipolar, In some instances, he's just like the coolest, nicest, smartest guy you could meet. In other instances, he's a shallow used car salesman asshole who is just shallow and in over his head, and petty and arrogant. And it's just like, I don't know. It's very interesting to see that kind of duplicity in a man. It was also like, the Magnificent Seven was like the final big faction they had. It was like, Ric Flair, Luger, Buff, Jarrett, Steiner, Animal, and there was one more, and I can't remember who the other person was. Maybe it was Medeja, I don't know, but if they counted her. But yeah, it was that was like the previous night's thing. All the storylines seemingly erased. Yeah, I mean, like, it was just constantly, toward the WCW. A lot of people say, like, oh, like the Finger Poke of Doom was the end. And, like, that's not true at all. Like, the Finger Poke of Doom was actually, like, really good, and it got me and my friends really excited. At least the one, like, me and my best friend, like, I had like two best friends. Like, one of them, me and him just watched WCW. WCW was just like his, like it was his favorite. It was my favorite. We had another buddy who's just kind of like casual, mostly watched Raw. I do need coffee. And actually, I could have sworn I made a cup, and I don't know where it went, but whatever. So yeah, and we were just like really happy about the Finger Poke of Doom, and we're really excited about the NWO coming back together. And my friend like recolor coded all the NWO on his WCW NWO Revenge, and then like, and hey Noel, what's your opinion about Steven Seagal's close relationship with Putin? I have thoughts. I will. Let me get to that. I'm going to just close off the wrestling thing. The real thing that killed WCW was there were a variety of long-term problems, and then there was just the reality that Turner just did not want wrestling on anymore, despite high ratings. It was not as high of ratings as it could be. I mean, you could theoretically get comparable ratings with TV movies and things like that. You could theoretically attract more attractive advertisers, even if they were throwing their money on stuff with lower ratings. And so, they just didn't want wrestling on anymore, and that was really the bottom line. Now, what really hurt wrestling's profitability in terms of its, it was losing a lot of money. And that was, I mean, obviously there were just very big contracts and just not a lot of returns due to, just dwindling house shows and pay-per-views and things like that. Although I don't have the books, and I know Bischoff is quick to say, and I'm sure he's right, that a lot of WCW's money got allocated to other things, and in order to bail out other entities within the Turner Empire that were deemed more important than WCW. and everything was losing money. It wasn't just WCW. I mean, Ted Turner had to sell the Braves, and so, there was just a lot of stuff that was getting dumped due to the tech bubble bursting and AOL, kind of coming into the Turner fold and it having all this money and then it losing all this money. So, it was, there was just a lot of stuff going on. But in terms of the things that WCW could control, just the biggest thing was they did not book Bret Hart properly, and they did not change up their story progressions. The NWO is the greatest story in the history of wrestling, but at a certain point, and I don't care that it got a lot of members, I don't care about any of that stuff. It's just that the story never really developed, and it just kind of stayed stagnant at a certain point, and then nothing changed, and then people just started seeing, since they knew that story, they started to turn over to Raw. All this stuff about they needed to push Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and all this other stuff. The Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and all those guys went to WWF, and they were in exactly the same spot on the card as they were in WCW. So I don't really want to hear it. I mean, the only thing that might have been interesting is that if you could have come up with a good story for some of those guys, you might be able to do things like progress the NWO and WCW stories and things like that. But if you think you're just going to throw Chris Jericho and Eddie Guerrero matches and things like that, and those guys, Jericho is maybe different on this, but all those mid-card defectors, which were super devastating to WCW, with the exception of Jericho and maybe Guerrero, none of them were, when we're talking Nitro, I'm not talking about Steve Austin or anything like that. Cause he left before Nitro. But if we're talking that kind of heart and soul group, of the mid card, the Giant, Jericho, Dean Malenko, Saturn, Jericho, Benoit, all those guys, they all pretty much did not develop much past they were in WCW. I mean, yes, Benoit and Guerrero did get heavyweight belts, but they were transitional champions, and and Benoit just snapped, and Guerrero died, and that was just kind of it, and the thing is who got really over when they jumped ship? Well, Jericho had probably the best debut in the history of wrestling when he jumped over, because he's wildly charismatic. And then it was the NWO, when they went over there, everyone was cheering them over The Rock and Austin. So I don't really want to hear that WCW would still be in business if you had more Booker T, Dean Malenko matches. That's just bullshit. They didn't utilize their stars properly, and Eric Bischoff's poor leadership at a certain point. I do know Jericho has a band. Eric Bischoff's poor leadership created extremely bad morale, which was, making people want to leave. And so that was, I think also hurting the product. Is that you had people that were willing to try to break their contracts, get out of their contracts, phone it in, things like that. And, just poor leadership creates a lack of enthusiasm, and then becomes kind of palpable. And then, with WWF, all the cylinders are firing because they have clear leadership over there. So, that was another big issue that internally to WCW. And yeah, obviously, Hogan is not to blame for the death of WCW, but his wild insecurities and Bischoff's inability to manage him and say no to him led to tremendous narrative blunders, not utilizing Bret Hart and Hulk Hogan, and just the really just kind of confusing, lackluster ending to Starrcade 97, that really did not help WCW, because that Bret Hart defecting and then Sting and Hogan at Starrcade very well could have been the killing blow for WWF, and instead it just sat there at that level. WCW just sat at the level it was at. and just kind of languished, and it kind of chugged forward a little bit, but you know, WWF was just had all the momentum in the world because they had figured out the zeitgeist of the young male viewer, you know, just really just a lot of, you know, a lot of attitude, you know, like using those NWO and ECW tropes and really pushing the envelope on the kind of humor and the kind of characters that guys, you know, would always like joke about and think were cool, you know. And so Vince was able to take, you know, Paul Heyman and Eric Bischoff's tropes and, you know, really promote them, you know, with his know-how. And once he had that, you know, he had the momentum, and then WCW just started, you know, screwing with its formula to the point that it alienated a lot of viewers, and you know, and it is really sad that, you know, Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff couldn't get along, because through it all, through everything I said, I still preferred WCW's product to WWF's. I just did. So there's that. What do I think about Putin and